And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Flying weather graphic for Thursday morning shows a lot of IFR here covering just about all of the Bering Sea and a zone extending into the northern or central interior here with some IFR for the Brooks Range and better conditions here to the south. Areas of marginal VFR possible across Kenai Peninsula, Susitna Valley, back in toward the Kuskokwim Valley. But VFR holds here for the southeast coast. And for the afternoon, improvement back to VFR here across southern Alaska, south of the Alaska Range. Along and north of the range there, along this weak frontal boundary, we've got some IFR from the east side there all the way down across the northern Bering Sea, including St. Lawrence Island and Nunivak Island. VFR for the Pribilofs down to the eastern Aleutians, Alaska Peninsula, or actually some marginal VFR, at least into Nikolsky, possibly on Alaska, and narrow band of IFR there just west of the eastern Aleutians. Bigger area here with another system out over the western Bering Sea. And we'll see where that moves for Friday morning. Really not too much here, just edging eastward, pushing in toward Adak, the late nighttime hours, early morning. Some IFR here just west of St. Matthew Island on down to the south. Another area here along the southwest coast. We'll see over the Yukon Delta back up to St. Lawrence Island. And still some IFR along that ever weakening frontal boundary here in the central interior with VFR north of that area, VFR to the south, including Bristol Bay, all the way across the Gulf to the Alaska, or to southeast Alaska. And then for Friday afternoon, back to just about solid VFR here for interior Alaska from the Arctic coast down into the Gulf of Alaska. VFR Bristol Bay, Alaska Peninsula, again eastward into the Panhandle, northwest Canada, and some IFR here from just south of the Bering Strait, more likely here for St. Lawrence Island on down to just north of the Pribilofs, but staying west of the southwest coast, even west of Nunivak Island and the Aleutians. Marginal VFR for passes tomorrow, and Atuvik and Adigan. So you see some improvement over the last couple of days with marginal VFR for both of those passes there in the Brooks Range. Lake Clark and Merrill, VFR, rainy VFR, and windy, marginal VFR with possible IFR in the northern entrance. And Isabel, VFR. VFR again from Antasta, staying VFR for Tanita, Portage, and of course Chilkoot and White. Freezing levels here, warm air aloft shifting eastward from where it is today, farther out over the Bering Sea with 2,000 feet a little farther north, but still a lot of warm air here coming into southern Alaska, 8 to 10,000 feet there for Cook Inlet on down toward Kodiak Island and Bristol Bay in the Alaska Peninsula, and roughly about 2,000 feet here across the southeast coast, and a little cooler out over the western Aleutians. Icing system out here to the west, moisture still streaming northward out in this area, so quite an area of possible isolated moderate rime icing coming up and over the top of high pressure here, bringing a chance of some icing into St. Lawrence Island. And then along this frontal boundary right through this area could be some areas of isolated moderate rime icing possibly here. Our best chance would be over here on the east side where there's a little bit more moisture. And for the jet stream, westerly flow or west-northwest flow, 115 to 135 knots here, cutting right across the north slope in the Brooks Range. High pressure sliding over to the Alaska Peninsula. And so we've got a broad area of southerly flow here out over the Bering Sea and the Aleutians, anywhere from 70 to 90 knots. And then to the east, we've got northerly winds, 80 knots for the eastern North Gulf Coast. They're very close to Yakutat. And northeast, 80 to 90 knots or 80 to 100 knots there across the southern Panhandle. 9,000 foot wind flow showing much lighter winds down at this elevation here for the southeast coast. Still a little brisk there for the northern Panhandle, but strongest winds here, or stronger winds, anywhere from 45 to 50 knots out of the west-northwest, again over the top of this ridge over Bristol Bay, cutting across the interior right down over Cook Inlet, and 40-knot northwesterlies for the eastern Arctic coast. West side of the high, south to north flow, 50 knots there for the roughly about the eastern Aleutians or so, but east of Atka Island, then 40 knots out toward Amchitka and Kiska. And for 3,000 feet, high pressure here from the Chukchi Sea down along the southwest coast. Couple of centers there, bringing northerly winds still up to 35 knots there for areas of Shelikof Strait, maybe Kamishak Bay and Kodiak Island. South to north flow here, Bering Sea, 35 to 40 knots, but much lighter up around St. Lawrence Island under the ridge there. Light over the interior, west-northwest, still kicking up to about 45 knots on the eastern Arctic coast. And still some zones of stronger winds here flowing out of the channeled areas here, maybe up to 40 knots. 35 to 40 knots, northern panhandle over toward about Yakutat. And for turbulence, with that, there'll be some moderate mechanical turbulence again, especially for smaller aircraft here for the central and northern panhandle over to about Yakutat, with isolated moderate possible here across Copper River Basin, especially the North Gulf Coast and the mountainous terrain there, Prince William Sound, Kenai Peninsula, down to Kodiak Island, and maybe still in the lee of the Alaska Range. Eastern Beaufort Sea coast, still a chance of some isolated moderate turbulence there. Surface of 4,000 feet, and a little bumpy here for the eastern and central Aleutians.